So, just in case you've been living under a game dev rock, a few weeks ago there was the 42nd installment of a game jam called Ludum, but for the rest of this video I'm going to pronounce it Ludum because that's just way too much effort to pronounce. So for 2 or 3 days, thousands of people from around the world come together as teams or individually and try to make a video game as quickly and as complete as possible with varying degrees of success. This is my 3rd time participating, and my work resulted in Ludum Simulator 2019, which I'm still not sure if I'm actually allowed to use the jam's name. We'll hope it's okay. So the idea of my game is it simulates the Ludum game jam itself, and you have to construct a game within the game, playing all the different mini games. It's all very frantic, and it was very fun to make. I honestly thought I wasn't going to finish it at all, but somehow it did eventually get finished. And then all the games get rated, and we have results come out. And I think it's safe to say that this time my results were pretty good. There's just a bit of room for improvement, but you know, pretty happy with those. I tried to make it a web game, but it just didn't get around to it, so it's just Windows and Mac. And speaking of, you can download it right now. Links are in the description. Well, I say right now, it's been there for 3 weeks, but since the game isn't very easy to understand just visually, I decided rather than making a trailer for this channel, I'd sort of describe how it was made in a sort of development postmortem thing. So, as well as just trying to make a game, the idea with Ludum is to follow a theme as well, which gets voted by the community and is announced as soon as the jam starts. But you can see about 15 themes that could win about a day before. So I sat down with a few friends and we tried to figure out some ideas for each of the themes. Some of them were much better than others, so I was sort of really hoping for some good themes, but everyone knows the theme is always dreadful, and all I had to do now was wait for the theme announcement at the start of the jam. So this was definitely not the theme I wanted at all. It was one of the least populated entries on the ideas table. So I tried to think up some more game ideas, but I just wasn't getting anywhere. I was sat in front of an empty notepad for like an hour, so I decided to call it a day almost straight away, but considering this is like 12 at night, that wasn't too much of a problem. I just decided, you know, I can wake up in the morning, get some really cool ideas, and just get started.
8 hours later.
So I did sort of get a couple of ideas, but they were mostly just really bad puns, and they just wouldn't tend themselves well to games at all. And I wasn't happy with how long I was spending having literally nothing made, so I made the executive decision to just ditch the theme, since they're more of guidelines. I'm not too bothered about getting a low position in the theme category. One thing that was stuck in the back of my head was one of the ideas from the brainstorm, which was under the 1 minute category, and it was Ludum Simulator. And the original idea was you'd have 60 seconds to produce a game, and it would use like WarioWare style mini games, if you've ever played those, and it seemed really fun. It didn't really work with the theme at all. I tried to like retrofit some sort of space limitation on it, but it's clearly a timer. But anyway, it was an idea, and I got going. The very first thing I did was drew a UI mockup on my whiteboard, and then I drew it up again in Serif Draw Plus, and then I drew it up again in Unity. So that meant I wasted quite a few hours on just drawing UI. So once the menu was in Unity, I started work on the first minigame. I decided on the sort of categories that you see on the screen. I knew what those were, but I didn't even know what games I was going to be making for them. I just started on the first one that I actually knew what I was going to do, and that was the physics game, it's just a really simple sort of tennis thing. You have to try and keep a rally going. I spent like an hour trying to make a tennis ball look right, modeling it and getting the textures going, which somehow is not the weirdest thing I've had to model. And that meant that it got until 5 PM on the first day before I even made the script to handle the minigame code. So as soon as I got that working, I instantly moved on to the second game, which was effects. The effects game is essentially just a target practice thing. There's things appear on the screen, you have to click them. So that, again, it was fairly easy to make. The time-consuming bit here was making particle systems, because I wanted when you clicked on them, it'd fire a huge fancy particle system. I don't know why I was spending so much time on like fancy effects, considering nothing's working at the moment. It just made it look really cool, so that was worth doing. I started work on the third minigame, which is dialogue, at about midnight, and that one wasn't too hard either. It's sort of a typing game where words appear on the screen and you have to use your keyboard to type out the words. The only problem here was finding a really big word list. Fortunately, I had one already from a sort of hangman solver that I'd made a year ago, so I just had to write a Python script to filter out a bunch of duplicate words and sort them by length, because one thing I wanted from the start was that the more time you spent in a minigame, the harder they would get. So in the tennis game, more tennis balls would appear. The effects game, more crosshairs would appear. And the dialogue game, the words will get longer and more difficult to spell. Again, none of these things are difficult to code at this point. It's just figuring out ideas and typing them and getting it working as quickly as possible. So this had brought me to the end of the first day, and things were not looking very good at all. I had 3 out of the 7 minigames playable, but they were just pretty awful. You could switch between the minigames, but there was still no sort of overarching game control at all, so it wasn't going very well. So for the start of day 2, I decided to do a bit of work on that game control. I set up the energy decline system, so that was nice. Then after that I moved on to the next minigame, which was the code game, but actually I still didn't know what I was going to do for that. So I had to spend more time brainstorming and figuring out the rest of these minigames, what are they actually going to be, so that took a lot of time. I eventually decided that the code game was going to be one of those sort of block-based instruction robot control-y things. That's a really bad description. There's a game called Lightbot, if you've ever played it, where you control a robot and you have to give it like forward, back, left, right instructions, and it would follow out the commands you give it, and you have to try and get it to a destination. And I thought, okay, I can do that, and that can't be too hard. I spent about 5 hours on that. Even worse is that probably 3 of those 5 hours was just code for the drag and drop system of getting these instructions and putting them somewhere else on the screen. Also, this robot at the moment was just a white capsule, which I definitely had to go back and fix. Once that was done, I moved on to the art minigame, which I knew what was going to be from the start. It was going to be a sort of drawing replication game. You'd be given a drawing and you had to sort of draw it on the other side of the screen using a limited palette and very basic controls. Again, this took ages, mainly because I somehow had to make up a bunch of sprites, and they had to look good because the whole gimmick of this game was going to be that you wouldn't be able to recreate the artwork because you don't have the good tools, which meant the artwork had to look nice, and I can't do nice art. This again was on a live stream, if you want to watch me suffer making pixel art. But yeah, eventually it got done. Then the next hurdle was actually writing the algorithm to compare the images. I didn't have any sort of references for how I could do that, so I just ended up throwing a bunch of random calculations in and hoping it would work. It didn't, and it still doesn't. I eventually just called it a day at something that worked it out well enough. I've already wasted way too much time on it, and this brought me to the end of the second day as well. So at this point I have 5 out of the 7 minigames working. They're looking better than before, but still not fully complete. There's still no overarching game controller, and it's just not looking very good. So to start the third day, I immediately got going on the final main minigame, which was the music game, and that again was a sort of straightforward one. It's like a Simon Says music drum loop recreation thing. So it gives you a sequence of like drum hits, and you have to play them back to the computer, and it will compare your input with its pattern and it will award you based on that. So that meant I had to create another accuracy scoring algorithm that I wasted so much time on the night before. Somehow this one worked out perfect the first time. I don't know why, but it just worked, which was nice, and it meant that the music game only took about 3 hours to do. The actual pattern making system that I had going was working really well as well. It meant I could type a drum loop in Microsoft Excel, which is really nice. It meant I could churn out a bunch of drum loops. They're not very good drum loops. I'm not a not a beat maker at all. At this point, all 6 main mini-games were done. In terms of code, it didn't look very nice, so I had to spend a lot of time sort of refining the assets, putting a bit of animations in here and there. The main important thing I had to go back and fix was the robot in the code game, so I spent a bit of time making a nice little robot model in Blender, which is definitely not inspired by any Pixar characters at all. And then I sort of added in a few sound effects around the place just to improve the atmosphere, because at this point the entire game was like unnervingly silent, and that definitely needed to be sorted out. But soon enough I was at 6 hours to go, and there was still no actual game loop, because I just kept putting it off. But fortunately I did know what I had to put in, because this game idea I kept thinking through my head. I knew exactly what logic had to be in there, so it was only a case of writing like a ton of code as quickly as possible. At about 4 hours to go, I decided the game needed a soundtrack. Again, probably a mistake, because that took like about half an hour to download the tracks. I did have a few in mind already, so I didn't like source them at least, but just trimming them all and putting them into a music controller, that just, again, burning time that I didn't have. At 3 hours to go, most of it was sort of coming together, but it still was missing the final piece, which was the debug game. And I had the idea for it from the start, and it's basically once you've done making your game, you progress to the debug minigame, and it'd be like a really fast-paced final rush to sort of eliminate as many bugs as possible. It's a really unnecessary addition to the game, but I just thought it would sell the idea of like this frantic development cycle, and it'd give a really nice finale to the playthrough. It was just a race to draw as much pixel art and write as much code as quickly as I could, and I got it done, fortunately, and I had about 30 minutes left to throw in as many extra bits as possible, a few improvements, but I literally working down to the wire and ran out of time, and there was a lot of things that I did want to improve a bit more, but to be honest, at that point I was just really glad that I even got the game finished at all, and I was finally ready to upload the game to the Ludum website. There was only one thing in the way. No, so obviously I got it posted eventually, but there were just so many opportunities, especially on the final day, for just one thing to go wrong and everything would have fallen apart. And terrible planning on my part, and it's definitely a lesson for everyone. Don't make your entire game in the last 10 minutes of a 72-hour game jam. That's some solid advice right there. So once the jam was officially finished, all the entrants have 25 days to play and rate each other's games, but at this point I was just relieved to have even submitted anything at all, especially considering I had no time left to do any play testing or bug fixing, which is what a lot of people do, or even have other people on their teams for. I just didn't even get around to that. I was just hoping that nobody could poke holes in my stuff. Unfortunately they did. There was quite a few bugs, but they weren't major, fortunately. And from what I could tell from the comments, people were just really enjoying it anyway. That was a great relief to see that I didn't just waste 3 days to just make something that wasn't even fun. I think comparing it to my first game, the Ketchup Quest game, if you've seen that, I thought that it was more contentful, and I think it had a bit more atmosphere, so I did have a bit of an inkling that it would score slightly higher than that one, but not that much. The only problem with these results is that it's going to be almost impossible to top it in the future. But what I can do in future jams is perhaps push the boat out a bit more. I think the fact that I was so familiar with the Unity engine and C#, it made it pretty easy to actually construct the ideas. Perhaps in the future I'd like to try with a different engine or something like that. So overall it was a really fun few days, and the amazing scores just added to that experience, and they also add to my portfolio website, way. And I definitely recommend checking out the Ludum site for yourself and trying out some of the games that everyone made. And there's some games that go off and carry on. You have post-jam versions, and they do amazing things. Perhaps you might see Ludum Simulator DX hitting store shelves in the near future. I don't think so. I'm too busy with uni, but I guess we'll see. And if you're interested in developing games yourself, you should totally go for it. I'd recommend downloading Unity, try out the tutorials, and once you're confident enough, go and enter a game jam for yourself. It's a really good learning experience, and it's an amazing, positive, and welcoming community. And I'd love to see your projects as well. If you make anything, feel free to tweet them at me or leave a comment. But that's about everything. I hope you enjoyed this insight into my hectic 3 days of matching a keyboard, and hope you enjoyed playing the game itself if you have done. Check it out if you haven't, and that's all. So thanks for watching.